I have here today with me Bob Falconer on my podcast, Healing Childhood Sexual Trauma. Bob has graciously accepted this invite in his busy schedule, so I appreciate that, Bob. Yeah, I want to give a little bit of a background of how I encountered you, and then, I have so many questions for you. Yeah, I was noticing like a year and a half ago this sense that in my own internal exploration, working with the different parts that came alive in this very fractured way as my repressed sexual memories came up, that one of these things that I thought was a part of me felt like it was something else, like it had a very different flavor of being. Like all of the other parts felt like little innocent inner children, and this other piece felt malicious, and often I would act in ways that I was blended with it. And then I had a moment where I was feeling really sad, like almost all of me was feeling really sad, and I could feel this smile in the background. Like there was something in me that was really glad about the misery I was experiencing. And I looked towards, internally oriented towards it, and I was like, hey, what's going on? Like, I'm feeling sad. What is the smile about? And it had this energy of, yeah, I'm just happy that you're sad. I'm like, yeah, why are you happy that I'm so sad? And it said something like, yeah, I just want you to suffer. And in that moment internally, and this was all an internal conversation. And I noticed there's a part coming up which is afraid of talking about this, because people who may not have like the fractured psyche, split psyche experience that capital T trauma brings about may not resonate with it.
Let me just say something for a second, Vignesh.
Yeah.
I think many, many, many people have the kind of experience you're describing, but they're almost universally afraid to talk about it because they think they'll be labeled as insane or weird or creepy. So even though it's not talked about so much, I think it might be way more common. So I think courage, like you're demonstrating, talking about it, can liberate a whole lot of other people. I just had to
Beautiful.
throw that in.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. I appreciate your steady encouragement. And this is something I've noticed with working in IFS domains with you, Bob, that there is a stronger directiveness I feel in your work than in some of the other IFS containers I've experienced. But looping back to this experience, I was able to say something like, actually, I don't want that for myself. Like, I don't want continual misery for myself. And this piece in me heard that and went, okay, well, if that's what you don't want, then fine. And I felt this energy in that moment. It just like floated away. Like it was very satisfied hearing that response. And that itself was a trippy experience. And around that time, I was also like, I chanced upon the book. I started reading the book and just got affirmed in my belief, like, yeah, I need to exercise this. And then I had I'm going to call it an exorcism. I know IFS calls it unburdening with you like a little over a year ago. And the main shift for me has been there's a certain level of grief that I was unable to access before I had this experience, because I would almost like lose control of my being to this really powerful, I would call it like a sinister joker energy, like a trickster energy. And he was humorous, and like, there was almost this experience of making light of deep trauma, and he could make fun of everything. And there was a lightness in it, like, oh yeah, it's a joke. It's all a cosmic joke. It's all a cosmic humor. But in that, I could not feel the grief, like the pain. And since then, I have been able to just relax into the pain instead of making jokes about it. And even the quality of my humor has shifted from dark undertones to like more uplifting humor. So having said that, like that's the context in which I met you. And I'm really curious to hear about, like, I've heard you speak so eloquently about your own history of childhood sexual abuse in other interviews. And to me, it's such a beautiful, it feels amazing to see a man speak calmly, in a centered manner, in a grounded manner, about what they experienced. And I wanted to start off there, and if you could share a little bit about your own history of childhood sexual abuse and your own healing journey to start this interview off, that would be great.
Okay. This is sort of timely because 20, 30 years, well, a long time ago, 20, 30 years, I published an autobiography, which was about the memory recovery phases of my therapy. And it's very, very explicit, a lot of details of sadistic, multiple offender child sexual abuse. So I'm back in that process right now as we speak. And I came from a family, I think the only word to really describe it is evil. My father was a sadistic sex offender and often did really not only raped me and beat me unconscious frequently, but would tie me up and choke me unconscious and hurt me with pliers and knives and burning cigarettes. And he had one of his partners, Hugh, living in the house with us much of the time, who also molested me and my brother. My mother had some psychotic episodes when we were kids, and when Dad started acting weird, she'd have a migraine and go into her bedroom and close the door. And she must have heard the screams, And then later, she started sexually abusing me too. My brother, at a certain point, started abusing me, joined the adults, and turned on me. When we were teenagers, my brother committed suicide. Let me be more precise. He died in a probably suicidal accident. When I was 20, 21, my father was murdered in an unsolved crime. But I was over 1,000 miles away teaching school with lots of witnesses. It wasn't me. But by all odds, I should be dead like my brother. I should be a junkie or a severe alcoholic or locked up somewhere. Prison is where many, many male survivors of sexual abuse end up. And I'm not. I've been a therapist involved in healing for 40, 50 years. I've written a bunch of books on this. I think of myself now as primarily a man of joy. And I'm I think, very creative. I've written, 8 books now. I have 2 more coming out next year, maybe 3. In my late 70s, I'm more productive and more creative than I've ever been. It feels like finally, through all this work on myself and working with others, I have something I really want to share with people. And I just hope my brain and body hold out so that I can keep doing this.
Beautiful. Yeah, thank you for sharing. I'm also reminded of this really interesting era that we live in where so many news about child sex abuse are like alive in the media. And I'm sure you've heard of the Menendez brothers case, which has been floating around. And I was just reminded of that given they were also brothers. I'm curious, like, where you're at right now. Like, I can relate to having access to creativity after having, tapped into this repressed abuse. And yeah, I just feel creatively alive. And yet, where I'm at right now, I feel susceptible to sudden grief emergence. Like something in the environment can, goes in and then I'm just crying. And it's created this space where I'm like, a little careful about what environments I choose, what kind of people I interact with, but it does feel like I'm in a protective, ascetic phase where I'm just like withdrawn a little bit because I might start crying and they might not know how to respond to it. And, oftentimes in those situations, I'm not holding it against them. It's just like they are saying something in a manner that doesn't feel tender enough and slightly misattuned, and I just start weeping. And I'm curious if do you relate to that? Was that ever a part of your journey? Is that happen now?
I still cry most days, but now I'm very grateful for the tears. I'm very grateful to have a tender, living heart. And I start getting bothered when I don't have that experience, when my heart is not tender, when it's wall. So I've really come to immensely value those tears. and that, you know, that tenderness toward the world and that openness.
Yeah, beautiful. Yeah, I resonate with that. And my heart was very walled up, is what I would say, most of my life. And I was walled up in a way where I wasn't even aware of it being walled up. And now I do feel like softened in my heart. And it's such a beautiful, lightening way of living. And then in moments it freezes up and then it relaxes again. And in that relaxation, there is typically tears that emerge. And
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, there's definitely gratitude.
I want to say something especially about media. Most of the media today, all of the news, is designed to make us frightened and angry. It isn't even really news, I think. I think it's mostly very, very intelligently, brilliantly designed things to stimulate us into fear and anger. So I think it's wise to limit your contact with that. It's poison. And here in America, it seems like everybody's hating everybody.
Mhm.
I think that's a truly terrible state of being.
Mhm.
And I think it's only good for the domination structures, the people who want to control other people. If they can get groups hating each other, if they can divide and conquer, then they're the ones who control who wins and who gets the good stuff.
Mhm.
Domination structures always want to create fear and hate,
Mhm.
whether this be political structures, churches, religions, whoever it is. If you want to control a whole bunch of people, the best thing to do is terrify them and give them someone to hate.
Mhm.
And it's an ancient thing to do. This is not in the thousands of years, this kind of stuff. So
Yeah,
I
very
think
well
it's
said.
good to limit our exposure to that.
Yeah, bringing us back to the thread of your life story, I'm curious about what I would label as like imagine two significant transition points as they live in my life, and as I'm imagining you went through those, or if you did not, I'm curious what your journey was. And the first transition point was going from never thinking about childhood sexual abuse to having this moment of like, wait, was I sexually abused, to recovering repressed memories. So that transition point. And then in my own healing journey, going from, Western psychotherapeutic, a little bit of like plant medicine, really reaching this point, which I think you express very, like you quote someone in your book, The Others Within Us, who says something like, the most significant truth I have learned in my journey is that spirits are real. It's like a 3-word sentence, spirits are real. And that was a significant transition point for me where I was like, oh, I've been like blabbering about spirituality for 7 years. And today I'm like, oh, shit, spirituality is about the reality of the spirit realm, of the spirit entity. So I'm curious to hear a little bit about your story on both those moments.
That was Michael Harner, he was an anthropologist, and he studied this tribe in South America, and was a real adventurer. Went and lived with people who'd never seen a white man before.
Mm-hmm.
And they were dangerous people. They were headhunters. And then he became a shaman himself. Somebody asked him when he was in his 80s at the end of his career, what's the most important thing you've learned in all these years of your amazing career? And he just said, spirits are real. Period. I think he's right. And I think there are forces, beings, entities, energies. I don't have a good name. I don't like the IFS names for these things, which is unattached burdens and guides. Tanya Luhrmann, another anthropologist, calls these things spiritual presence experiences. I think that's better because it's not judgmental at all. They happen to people. They have huge impacts on people's lives, both positive and negative. There's evidence for this in every culture that we have records of, in every era of history. They're important to many, many, many people. And whatever our ideology is, these things deserve study. And they're real. I mean, people change their lives on a dime. They have one experience of powerful spirit presence and their whole life changes. These psychotherapists cannot do that. All our education and degrees and study, we can't do that. And that happens. And also people can be profoundly negatively affected by spirits. So pragmatically, they're real. What is out there in the universe, I don't really know. But within, I have my ideas and beliefs, but to me, it doesn't matter. In terms of the functioning of a human being, they are very, very real. We need to take that seriously.
And then did you have, I'm curious if you, with your own sexual trauma history, like was it repressed at any point, and how did it emerge?
Totally. Turning points now are different for me. And because the farther along I go on this healing path, the more I think you don't heal from major trauma without some spiritual basis. You need, and I think that means finding something bigger than you are that you can form a relationship to. Personal relationship with something bigger than you are. Any language will work. I mean, a lot of my Islamic friends talk about jinn. Fine, I don't need to impose my language. And I just want to be really open to theirs. So having a relationship, the alcoholics, the AA, they talk about higher power. I think that's a great phrase. It's very non-committal. But, they say to recover from addiction, you have to turn your life over to a higher power. It seems very real to me. So I'm going to talk about the major transition points in terms of this. When I was quite young, one of the things my father did a lot was to suffocate me unconscious, often while he was raping me. Because I think it's biologically hardwired that we cannot override or suppress or numb out our responses to suffocation. It does something to the nervous system. So it is a very severe and sophisticated form of trauma, a torture, even though it leaves no marks. It gets very, very deeply into people's nervous systems. That's why what America is doing in Guantanamo Bay to those prisoners, that's torture. That's not enhanced interrogation, that's torture. But anyway, he did this a lot because I couldn't numb it out. It would always just shatter me. And sometimes during that, I would experience a merciful female presence. And it was the only merciful thing, and it was just so wonderful to rest into her and melt into her. But I don't know if these count as near-death experiences, but that's just names. It doesn't matter. Unfortunately, from my point of view, she kept sending me back into my body. I did not want to. And eventually, with my childlike thinking, I cursed her. I got really angry and cursed her and was enraged at her and hated her. Go away, don't, and she left. And it took me many decades to reconnect with her. But I think that experience gave me something that sustained me. Another one that gave me an opening to spirit, even though I had rejected it in an offensive way. When I was in high school, I had this girlfriend named Ruth who was consistently kind and loving to me. She would never have intercourse with me, which of course as a high school boy I didn't like. But she was consistently loving and kind. And to me, this was like, it was, what? People are actually loving and kind? This doesn't make sense. It was like I was being hit over the head with a board. What? People aren't like this. And she was I kept when's she going to stick the knife in my back? When's she going to hurt me? She never did. And I think that loving kindness and gentleness put a crack in the concrete wall I was building around myself so that some light and life could get in and out. And, you could dismiss this as it's just puppy love, two teenagers necking and kissing. But it wasn't that for me. It changed the whole course of my life. So, and I would not have said that at the time, but looking back, I think that those are two really significant transition points.
Beautiful. Yeah, there is something, and also I'm wondering if you're hearing a background noise. Is that increased in the last few minutes?
I think so, a little bit.
Right? Yeah, I'm just tracking that for now. I'm not sure where it's coming from.
Yeah, well, it's not in my house. There's no noise outdoors.
Yeah. Sometimes I've noticed that on these thematic subjects, when I'm on a digital medium speaking with someone, there is something that happens in the electrostatic realms that can show up as these background noises, and it's
Hmm.
not something I've been able to make meaning of much, but it's definitely something I've tracked.
Does happen. Yep.
Yeah. Yeah, what I wanted to reflect was just the beautiful simplicity of these transition points that you spoke of versus I was in a community gathering yesterday and people were sharing significant moments in their life, and there is like a dramaticness and a bigness to how people share the stories, at least some of them. And I have done that too. Like, what was a significant point? There's like a big dramaticness to the story that I've shared, some of the earlier podcast episodes that I've shared myself. And more recently, and over the last 2-3 years or so, my journey has been a lot in what this sacred sexuality, conscious sexuality subculture of the larger conscious community in the US, tantra, neo-tantra, conscious kink, domination, submission. Like, I've gone deep into that and learned different ways of like opening myself up and opening the woman I'm with up erotically. And where I've landed presently is just like, yeah, just the simplicity of love is all that matters. Just like, if my heart is open, if her heart is open and we are connecting, I don't need all of these techniques. She doesn't need any of these techniques. It's just like connecting in that heart open space and allowing Eros to emerge in that heart open space. And this is partly where I've also had a pretty big shift. And then channeling that towards like creation of life is like the most beautiful healing thing that two humans can do, which kind of brings me to inquiry I have about you. Like, you've spoken to this necessity of having a higher power, a larger spirit entity, call it by different names, but necessity of that in one's healing journey. And I'm curious if it has taken a specific form in your life. Like, is there a specific God, spirit entity that you have been cultivating a connection with, that you can name, that others have the same name for, that has helped you on your journey?
There are two spirits I talk to a lot, and they have suggested that I keep their names private. Because I don't want people to feel influenced in any way, or like I'm trying to get them to get involved with the spirits who talk to me. And if I just refer to it as spirit, it leaves it more open for more people. And there have been certain experiences where spirit came in very, very powerfully. And one that was very important to me was, for a while I had a partner who, when I met her, she was a hospice nurse. And I thought one of the strongest women I'd ever met. And she had a series of mental breakdowns, became an active alcoholic, tried to kill herself 4 times. And not just little attempts. 3 of them ended her in the ICU on a ventilator. So really like this close to death. One of the times after she'd been in the ICU, she was in a locked ward. And I was already really worried, how in the world can I keep her safe? Because they were having troubles keeping her safe in a locked ward with 24-hour, 7-day-a-week care. So I was already... And then I go in and I get a diagnosis from this retina specialist eye doctor. Bob, you're going blind. You need to prepare to lose your vision. And I go home and I'm just, crying and panicked and miserable and freaked out and, just what you'd expect, right? It's just an impossible situation. And one morning before dawn, I was sitting there and I looked up at I think it was a star, it might have been Venus in the night sky, and suddenly I was flooded with a peace. More peaceful than I'd ever felt in my whole life. And at first I thought, this is ridiculous. You should be panicking now. But the peace just got stronger and stronger and filled me. And I just resonated with this deep, deep peace. And that went on for maybe 10 days. And then I came back to, you got to deal with some really ugly stuff right now. And I'm doing way better than those doctors ever thought possible. Done a lot of, there was psychological or psycho-spiritual dimensions to what was wrong with my eyes. But also the medical care has improved dramatically. But it's almost a miraculous cure. But that piece was it was an opening, and so I kept trying to develop that opening to that spirit. And there's one technique that I use that is embarrassingly simple-minded. When this was first suggested to me, I was assisting Kay Gardner, who's a senior lead IFS trainer who I admire a great deal. And she suggested this practice, and I thought, this is really stupid. But it's Kay, so I'll try it. The practice is this. You just sit down with a sheet of paper and a pen, and you write your name, and you write down a question. And then you write spirit's name, your guide's name, or just spirit, and then you write an answer. And then you do a written dialogue. And you do that for, I think it was 10 minutes with her, or it might have been 12 or 15, something like that. And you just don't stop. Even if all you're writing is shit, 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 shit. Just keep that pen moving. And the very first time I did it, whoever was writing back, whatever that was wiser than I am. Stuff I don't know. And its words were both challenging and reassuring at the same time. So I was like, what? So I've been doing that practice every day since then for probably a decade. And I'm actually working on a book summarizing those dialogues. There's over 3,000 pages of them. And I sort of wanted to preserve the dialogue form so people would understand this is a personal, heart-centered relationship between me and spirit. It's not some didactic thing at all. But I can't because it's, 3,000 pages. Who's going to read 3,000 pages? So that's one practice and one opening. And there have been many more.
Fascinating. Yeah, I love the simplicity of that practice. And where I'm at in my journey, the simple practices do resonate. So I really appreciate hearing that. And actually, it reminds me of a tool that is often taught in these sacred sexuality trainings that I reference, that I've done a few of in my own healing journey. And it's called aspecting. And it involves like sitting on one side, calling in the presence or spirit of the person you want to have a conversation with on the other side, and then speaking whatever you want to speak to them, and then switching your position and responding as if you're them. And I had done this exercise in the very first training I did with this school called the International School of Temple Arts. And this was after I'd recovered my first set of repressed memories, which were of multiple instances of sodomy and fellatio from my maternal grandfather. And he was dead by the time I recovered these memories. So I called in his spirit, and I've written an essay about it, but the conversation started verbally, but then it went into these like really wild realms, and I ended up taking my vengeance onto his spirit in a way that I ended up like carving his cock out with a knife, and I ended up raping his spirit that I'd like called in, and released a lot of this like built up rage and anger that I'd caught up in my body through that. And I still sit with like the karmic implications of that. Like I don't know clearly, but I don't carry any charge towards him anymore. Like when I think of him, there have been even moments in the last like year or so where he has shown up as a guide of sorts, and I've like been able to acknowledge that there is possibly some kind of a karmic contract, soul contract I had with him, where we both came into this particular physical relationing because there were some lessons that I needed to learn. So And I don't have that ease or lack of charge towards my other perpetrator, his friend, who's still alive. And I tried to do the same exercise with him, but it did not have that effect. And I've made meaning out of it as that he's alive, so I couldn't fully like bring his spirit in. I'm curious how you feel towards your father right now, because you said he died, and I've heard you speak about his death, and I've also heard you in other interviews speak humorously about how it wasn't you. And in that like humorous reference, my senses catch on, like there's a part in you perhaps that, like, yeah, I would have loved to kill this guy. And I'm curious how you relate to him. Like, what is the charge, if at all, any that you have towards him, and how does that show up in your day-to-day life?
Okay, good question. I have gone through visualizations like that with my father and with my mother. At one point, I started this list, 100 ways to kill my father. And they were very graphic and detailed and quite inventive.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm going to tell a story about a meeting with Pia Melody, who was one of the greatest, I believe, addiction treatment specialists ever, and also really, really knew how to work with abuse and trauma. She's retired now. She was the co-founder of The Meadows, which is a big addictions recovery center in Arizona. So I'd worked with her many times. She did these workshops she called Survivors.
Hmm.
And there'd be 6 of us and her and another therapist, and we'd all go stay at that other therapist's house and work for a week, 8-10 hours a day. So very, very intense. And I'd done several of these weeks. And then after she knew me quite well, it was my turn. She said, okay, Bob, you sit down here. Don't take any notes. We're going to have this other guy over here take notes. I'm going to tell you the 6 character defects you have that keep your father's spirit alive in you. Ready? And first, your arrogance. Here's how I've seen you be arrogant and act as though you were better than other people, and that keeps your father's narcissism alive in you. And she was very specific, very calm, and very accurate. And by the end of 6 of these, I was just devastated. I felt like a puddle. I thought I'd done some recovery, and now there's mountain ranges to climb ahead of me. And then she said, you got all that? And I go, yep, yeah, I got it. And then she said, okay, now we're going to do the hard part. And she said, your anger is a spear that keeps you connected to your father's spirit.
Hmm.
You need to break that spear or you will never be free of him.
Hmm.
Here's how we're going to break it. You're going to take his spirit, put it in that empty chair over there. You're going to tell him how much he hurt you without getting angry at him.
Hmm.
How close do you want the chair?
Hmm.
And I started screaming at Pia, you fucking idiot, that's the stupidest goddamn thing I ever heard, you bitch, you. All the 4-letter words you can think of. And when I ran out of steam, she just smiled a little bit and said, how close do you want the chair, Bob? Totally, and I can really rage. I can really cuss pretty good. And I did it, and it made an immense difference. And for me, that's what forgiveness is. It's not some kind of hallmark thing, or, like pastel colors and nice, nicey nice lace. No, it's not like that at all. It's about letting go of my anger so that I'm not connected to him, or my mother, or any offenders in any way anymore. So most people don't want to hear that. They want something else. But that's what I got.
Beautiful. Yeah, I love or what I took in as you were sharing that was the emphasis on revealing the impact that another's actions have had from you while keeping your heart soft and tender, versus like kind of closing up and like you, blame, like that energy, instead of being like, yeah, really softening and revealing, like, hey, like this really hurt. Like this was horrible. What you did was absolutely horrible. And And it's difficult. It's difficult to stay soft in revelation of that hurt of someone else's action. Because for me, the fear that comes up is they might shut off and again start hurting me, or there might not be any space. And it's been, or at least where I stand right now, the journey for me has been like, okay, how do I stay soft and maintain a space where I can express hurt? And if they're unable to hear it, then just create some space for them to find regulation, for myself to find regulation, and still stay soft.
It's absolutely not about them at all. It's all about me not allowing myself to be connected to them by rage anymore. Their response doesn't matter. I mean, if they physically attacked me, that would be an issue. But I think for me now, it's never okay to hate. And that's, in these dialogues I do with Spirit, that's one of the messages I get consistently, is from Spirit. There are some people and some circumstances that are so bad, you might need to kill them. That's true. There are many people who the best thing you can do is never interact with them again. However, you never need to hate anybody. Every time you hate anybody, it damages you. It damages your soul. It might hurt them. Some people like being hated. But it always damages you. You never have to hate. I can't live up to that.
It's a beautiful reminder. And yeah, there is something about that aspect, at least the first example that you shared there, which is that you might have to kill them, which is reminiscent for me of one of the messages of one of the main Hindu epics, the Bhagavad Gita. The Gita, which is very much like, it's the dharma of the warrior to kill, but the warrior also kills with an open heart. Like, you don't have to close your heart up. And it's a really fascinating message to sit with, because it really contrasts with the Buddhist messaging. And I'm pretty sure even Christianity has this emphasis on no killing.
Wait a minute. I have to interrupt you here.
Yeah.
That's the modern Western interpretation of Buddhism and the modern Western interpretation of Christianity. From 800 to maybe 1200 AD, the Tibetan monks, the monasteries, were one of the most feared military forces in Central Asia. They were warriors, and they were incredibly fierce. Great records, because there were the Dunhuang caves on the Silk Road. They were sealed up in about 1000 AD. And they were opened in the 1920s. There are thousands and thousands of scrolls. We have this incredibly detailed history of this one little spot at one particular time. The Tibetans were incredible warriors. Incredible warriors. So Buddhists aren't always so peaceful.
Yeah.
And Christianity too. I mean, look at all the wars that have been fought in the name of Jesus. God.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that interjection, and I'll send to you this image that I once created of the Buddha as a Muay Thai fighter, like a Thai kickboxer, and it's an image where the Buddha's serene face I superimposed it on the body of a strong kickboxer, and it really definitely resonates with me. It brings me still to this subject of do you get the last episode that I released on this podcast was about, I titled it The Healing Indulgence of Vengeance Fantasies. And for me, the healing effect has been almost like a redirection of my self-destructive energy from suicidality onto the one perpetrator that I know who's alive. And there is this question in me of Vignesh, what are you going to do once he dies? Where are you going to direct this destructive energy? And I'm curious if, you mentioned your father, you also mentioned multiple perpetrators. But did you try approaching any of these people and kind of gaining clarity either in the physical realm or in the spirit realm?
I approached my mother and confronted her about what she'd done and what Dad had done. The first time I did it, she denied any involvement herself, but said, I always suspected your father had done that. Because there were other gay men living in the house with the family throughout my childhood. It's kind of hard to deny that. And she put up with that. But within a week, she was sending me these letters saying, "What drugs are you taking?" And then she joined the False Memory Foundation.
Wow, I didn't realize that. I see.
Yeah.
Interesting.
I have dealt with both my mother's and father's spirits. And my father's, they both have somewhat pretended to be apologetic, but I think my mother is still just intent on destruction. My father, I think, actually might want to heal, but I don't want to be part of that.
Yeah, interesting.
Go in peace.
Yeah,
We are no longer connected. Go in peace.
yeah.
I think in terms of having this great anger, which is totally justified, I think the anger is life force, and we don't want to make that bad or shame it in any way. It's so beautiful that that flame of anger burns
Mm,
clear and bright in people. I've used dance a lot for that kind of anger, ecstatic dance. That's really been wonderful for me because I've been able to move at the maximum exertion my body is capable of to highly rhythmic music, which builds my energy and that can really move through me in a very physical way. I also think from an inner work point of view, there are parts of us who are carrying that rage. And when we go back and witness how horrible it was for them, we can get them out of where they're stuck in the past. We can get them to someplace safe in the present, and we can help them unburden that rage, put it into one of the four elements or something like that, so that they no longer have to carry it anymore. So you don't have to have that destructive rage going to you or anybody out in the world or any place. It's just not in you anymore. It can be transformed. It can be composted in the earth, burned in a fire, lots of different ways. But it really can be. And then that energy is free. That can become part of your creativity and stoke the fires of your love. It can do all these wonderful things. It does not have to stay destructive.
Beautiful. Yeah, I've definitely I can connect to the life-giving force of rage. And
Yeah.
earlier on, I would say 3 years ago, and I'm also deep into the ecstatic dance practice. And 3 years ago or so, I also do a lot of circling, authentic relating. And in that, I would notice moments where I would get triggered by someone else and notice the rage come up. And really, in that moment, just feel how good and life-giving it felt to have the rage in my body and distance it from the source of its rage or what is causing the rage. Is like let that thought go and just feeling like being ablaze and just alive.
Yeah. That person who triggered it, they're just a trigger. They're not the cause. And so it's so good you're doing that, Vignesh, letting go of that. Because a lot of people, they get into this blame and, they're going to go after that person who triggered. That, that I think aborts healing, the healing potential of every moment of rage. I think
Beautiful.
every moment of rage, it could be, if used well, a doorway to deep healing. It's not something to be shamed or made wrong or bad.
What's the key there, Bob? Like, what is the key?
Okay. First is to welcome it without shaming it. You're valuable. You are life force. You have kept me alive. Welcome. I respect you. And then the second thing would be to see if you can unblend from it, separate from it. Something like rage holder. Could you pull your energy out of my body enough so that I can be here with you and you're not left alone with your rage? And then if it can do that, it's a matter of building a loving relationship with that part of you who's held the rage. Almost always, one part of us gets the job of holding the rage for the whole system. So it's actually taken on this heroic, I don't think is too strong a word, job of holding something really difficult for the whole person so that the whole person can stay alive and function in the world. So if you welcome them with that kind of deep respect, then you can help them go back, and then you can start this process of witnessing them completely, getting them someplace safe, and helping them get this out of their bodies so that it can be transformed. And then this life energy can come forward as creativity, or I don't know how it will come forth in you.
Beautiful. I'm curious in this inner exploration for yourself as you have gone through this journey of unblending from rage and like seeing it, like have there been moments where you have released entities yourself? And this also is a segue into just generally like how many times has that happened for you? Like how many can you speak a little bit to your own direct entity release and your sense of how these got into you in the first place?
Okay. Sexual abuse of children almost literally injects foreign energies into the child, which is a horrible and still to me disgusting reality. But I think it's very, very true. Most people with major trauma have external energies, or I know a lot of people, they hear the word entity and they go, no, no, it's bullshit. Whatever you want to call it, there's something that was not part of that person inside them. And these are quite common. I mean, they're not, let me see. Yeah, I had several in me. I talked a little bit about that when I was told I was going blind. The condition I have is wet macular degeneration, and I also had some other macular problems. But the symptom is I would get blisters on the back of my eyeball, which would deform and bend the vision so everything was blurry and weird. And then if that kept going, it would start bleeding into the eye, and then you're blind. So I worked with this psychologically with Dick Schwartz, the founder of IFS. And when we went in there into my inner world and looked, there was a creature in there that looked like a spider with a scorpion's tail. And it was stinging the back of my eyeballs, causing these blisters. And we worked with it, surrounded it in light, got the parts who let it in, gently moved it out. And it was my mother's energy. She had always appeared to me as a spider, because a spider mother will eat its own young, which is what she was like with me. And so we got this thing out. Clearly some kind of external energy. It was not a part of me. It was something else. We got it out, and my eyes started doing way better than the doctors thought was possible. So, who knows? I mean, it's not like hard evidence where you can go, this is a miracle or this is spiritual healing. Who knows? But these things did happen. So that's probably the most vivid example of an energy like this getting into and getting it out and having it make a big difference. And I think yeah, go ahead.
In relation to that, I'm curious where you are at now, because I've looked into some of the research around IFS and chronic physical ailments, and I also had a recent IFS experience where there was like a chronic pain in my heel, which ended up being like a part that needed attention, and it had caused heel bursitis for me. And I'm curious now, are there any physical ailments that you would at all use, allopathic or Western medical?
Definitely, no doubt. Still, the allopathic treatment for what's going on with my eyes is injections directly into my eyeball. I get those injections, but I don't need them anywhere near as often as they were telling me I would need them. And I'm doing way better than they thought these injections could cause. It's not to me either or, it's both and. So I would not encourage anyone to abandon their allopathic treatments for this. I would say do this too. I look pretty much most illnesses, I think probably all, but I don't know, have a spiritual or psychological dimension to them. One particular kind of illness, autoimmune diseases of all sorts, seem to have very, very high frequency of spiritual or spiritual, psychological, I don't know what to call it, non-physical dimensions to them.
Yeah.
So, and any physical condition can be worked with, on this other basis. Sometimes, like Dick has asthma, and he says, if I go into a room where there's a lot of dust, I'm going to have an asthma attack. And sometimes if I go into a room where people are irritating me, I will have an asthma attack. There's a button in there that parts can push. There's like a physiological weakness that parts can use to influence the person.
Yeah, my dad has a psoriasis, and it's definitely, I've had a similar sense around, yeah, where the body's attacking itself. There is something perhaps in the body that shouldn't be in the body, and so the body's trying to rid it in physical ways. And perhaps cancers are also manifestations of those.
So I would say both and. Don't abandon the allopathic care and don't abandon the psychological spiritual care either.
Yeah, lovely. There was another thread that was coming alive in me, but it's dropped off for now. And I'm also noticing, yeah, we are close to the top of the hour. I wanted to get a sense of what you would say to any listeners tuning in. Like, I get a lot of people who tune in who have had recovery of repressed memories, and they can be in this, like, panic state. And I've myself gone through recovery of repressed memory, CPTSD, like just regular panic attacks. And so my listeners that tracked with my content have a similar history. And I can imagine that presenting this entirely new domain of spirit infestations can be challenging for some of them to hear. And I'm curious if there is any words you have to share with them.
Okay. We have a spiritual dimension. Our minds are porous. We can, and this means we can have contact with divinities and also with negative spirits. And there's all sorts of hardcore scientific evidence that our minds are porous. I think this is a good thing. It's unavoidable, but it's also a good thing. And I think it's one of the causes of the modern epidemic of mental illness in the West and places that are influenced by Western culture is the belief that our minds are not porous. That Tanya Luhrmann called it the citadel model of mind that we've developed in the West. That everything inside our head is ours, it's private, and it constitutes our identity. Now that seems like a big, strong, fortified thing, but it's not. It's incredibly brittle and therefore fragile. A person who has that model of mind built into them hears one voice that they don't think they've ever heard, that doesn't feel like theirs, and they're shattered. They think, oh my God, my brain's broken. I have to be on antidepressants or antipsychotic medicines for the rest of my life. Well, no, people have been hearing voices like that throughout history. It's a normal, healthy psychological function. And just one more thing I want to say about that. It used to be, if you admitted, not long ago, if you talked about hearing voices, people would lock you up. That was enough evidence for you to be considered psychotic. And that's almost criminal, and that's not so far in our past. There was studies of couples that have been married 45 years and more, and one partner had died. 80% heard the voices of the deceased partner. 80%. This is not evidence of mental illness. It's a normal, sometimes healthy and wonderful aspect of mind. I think we can connect to a much bigger mind inside. We are connected to it, but we sort of block that out because it's not ideologically acceptable to the modern Western world. And I think that ideology is a huge problem. So I hope you hear this talk of entities or unattached burdens or spiritual dimensions of healing as something that actually is very optimistic. It gives you a whole new level of resources. And it also means that change and healing can come much faster than traditional Western models allow for. Much faster. And there is no trauma that cannot be healed. There's a way they say this in the Al-Anon, one of the 12-step groups that I really like. There is no human suffering so terrible that it cannot be made better. Because to me, that's, you think about it that way, it's undeniable. Somebody's dying a horrible death, you can go hold their hand. Doesn't matter what the suffering is. There is no human suffering that cannot be made better. So I would add that message and the idea that this opening to the spirit realm actually gives you huge resources for healing at a depth you might not have even hoped for.
Beautiful. Yeah, thank you. That was such a beautiful transmission. And for the IFS trained coaches or therapists tuning in who are curious about this flavor of work and want to deepen, other than your offerings, which are plentiful in themselves, like, are there any other, like, there is a specific flavor of exorcisms that I've observed you do, and there is like a honoring the other as a sovereign self and a compassion, kind, boundaried, okay, your time here is complete. And that flavor is so beautiful. And recently I was at the Russian Orthodox Church, local church, for the Orthodox birthday of Jesus Christ, Jan 7th, and they did an exorcism there because they were introducing a couple into the church, and it was very, old Christian, like, in the name of the Lord I banish thee, and in the name of the Lord I banish thee, and it felt very ritualistic and I couldn't sense any energetic movement actually happening. So I'm curious, like, if there are other practitioners or workshops that you would recommend, it would be just helpful advice to other therapists, coaches tuning in.
This is the biggest, you've put your finger on the biggest difference between me and exorcism. I don't even use the word exorcism for what I do. Exorcism and the deliverance ministries among the Protestants are traditionally very combative. They're warfare, spiritual warfare. I think these beings that get attached to us are lost, and they are also suffering. And we can just help them go on where they need to be. They're in the wrong place. And the spiritists of Brazil know a great deal about this stuff. And in Brazil, there are over 50 psychiatric hospitals that have spiritist healing mediumistic teams associated with the hospital. So they are way ahead of us in terms of bringing these two worlds together. Mm-hmm. So that is a huge resource if you speak Portuguese, or if you have enough money to go to Brazil and hire a Portuguese translator. There's a group in Seattle that was founded by Betsy Bergstrom, and she calls her work compassionate depossession. It's very much like what I do. These spirits who are bothering you are usually just lost souls, and we, in a very compassionate, loving way, help them go on. Now, my wife is Korean, so we have been studying the Korean shamanic tradition with the Mudang, which is overwhelmingly female. And it's close to 5,000 years old, so they have some experience. When they encounter these spirits in people, their number one belief is the reason the spirit couldn't go on and got stuck to that person is because its suffering had never been witnessed. So what the Korean shamans, the Mudang, do is they offer to witness that spirit's suffering. And once that suffering has been witnessed, the spirit can then move on and go into where it needs to go to be reincarnated in their view of the afterworld. So it's basically compassion-based. So I think there's probably more, but these are the ones that I know in enough detail to be confident to speak about.
Beautiful. Yeah, I'm reminded, I'm also noticing the static has built up. It's really interesting, and it had dropped in between. Yeah, and it's like built up again. And I think what is alive in me is this sense that I have developed more recently that or what has been bringing me closer to the exploration of Jesus Christ, which has been alive in my life, is this sense that there are some of these like really powerful ascended master spirit entity beings like Jesus, like Ram, Hanuman, that can just very easily request these lesser spirit beings that are kind of stuck in humans to move on. And so there is a way to actually, in my view, do this through Christ. It's just that one needs to have that direct connection with Christ, and in the ossification of the church and kind of the institutionalization, there is a lot of words being spoken, but then the priests go drink in the evening and are numbing out their own pain
and molest the altar boys.
molest you. So it's like that direct connection to Christ is being lost. Yeah.
I want to say one other thing. These malevolent entities almost always get into people because they promise some part of that person something of value. The most common way they get in is there's some kid being molested, absolutely powerless, and this dark energy comes in and goes, I got some power, kid. You want some power? Of course, the kid's going to say, yeah, please, anything, at any price. I need, and that's how they get in. So the way to get them out without causing damage or doing any violence is to find any parts who let them in. Let those parts know you're not bad or wrong. You might even have saved this person's life. And it's time to let that thing go. And to work in a loving, patient way to help the person reconnect with those hurt parts. So the part goes, you're right, I don't need that thing anymore. And that way that thing can leave without any tearing or ripping or damage. So that's the way I would work. It's all compassion and care, patience, love, curiosity.
Beautiful. And in closing of this chat, are there any like day-to-day practices that you have incorporated into your life that allow you to, let's say, stay open, kind, porous, but ensure that things that would cause you suffering do not just get stuck inside you? Like,
Okay.
how do you?
They still get into me sometimes. I'm working with people who have these things in them a lot, and sometimes they jump into me, but I'm not afraid of them anymore. So that I feel some weird energy, I can get it out. Yes, I have many daily practices I do. I'm a compulsive journaler. I have over 20,000, like 16 feet on a bookshelf, pages of records of my relationships with my parts and inner world.
Wow.
So I do this. I also dance every day. Are you still there, Vignesh?
I am, yeah.
Oh, you're back. You froze.
Yeah.
So I also dance every day. Mostly now I just go out in the woods. I live up on a mountainside and I dance with the trees. And that really helps me move these things through and refreshes my spirit. I do that daily written dialogue we mentioned before. There's a meditation that's available on my website called the Ceiling Light Meditation that is very, very helpful for many, many people as like a daily practice thing to keep them full of life force, spirit, or whatever word they want to use. I don't. In IFS, people talk, I'm self, full of self.
Beautiful. Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much for sharing these like very practical steps, and all of these resonate. And yeah, there's something about dance that I've noticed for me, which in moments actually allows these entities to also express. And in that expression, there is a little bit of like that aspect of witnessing of what their suffering is what I feel when I'm dancing wildly. And yeah, the other tips are also something I'm noting down for myself. Want to incorporate those. Well, yeah, thank you so much. This was such a delight. There is so many more threads alive in me, and I want to honor your time and presence, and I'm really appreciative of your own direct journey as a male survivor of childhood sexual abuse. Like, you're an inspiration to me and many others, and really appreciating also your courage to go into realms that the institutions were being hush about, and like your courage to just speak these out openly. Like, that means a lot to me as someone who has had repressed sexual memories. Like, that openness of speaking out these things that others are careful about speaking, it really means a lot.
Good. It's been delightful talking to you. Let's do it again sometime.
Thank you, Bob. Take care.
Blessings. Bye-bye.
Bye.